Hello everyone, welcome back to EduRev. Today we are going to study the topic microorganisms, friend and foe. So do you people know that what are microorganisms or maybe what are its types? If not, then do not worry. In this lecture we will study exactly this only. That is what are microorganisms and different types of microorganisms. So before starting, let's see what our session plan is. So, firstly, we are going to see that what are microorganisms. Then we will see what are the types of microorganisms. That is protozoa, bacteria, fungi, algae, and finally viruses. Now, these two topics, that is microorganisms as friends and microorganisms and our foe. So these two topics are also part of this chapter, but we are not going to cover these two topics in this lecture. We will take these topics in further lectures. So without further ado, let's begin. Just tell me one thing, that have you ever noticed a drop of water? Now, if you have observed a drop of water in a pond through a microscope, you will see a lot of tiny rounded structures. Structures like these. Can you see these tiny rounded structures? And if you haven't, then just go get a drop of water and observe it under a microscope. Now, these tiny creatures are known as microbes or microorganisms, and they are all around us, and they are so small in size that they cannot be seen with bare human eye. Now, these organisms are usually unicellular in nature. So, unicellular means that they are single celled organisms. So, you can just imagine that because these organisms only have one cell, so how tiny and small they are going to be. And also, let's see how we can actually classify these microorganisms or microbes. Now, we can classify microorganisms or microbes into 5 categories. So, number 1, we have protozoa, then we have bacteria, then we have fungi, then we have algae, and finally, we have viruses. So, let's study about all of them in detail. Firstly, we are going to study about protozoa. Now, there are two important points which you need to keep in mind when we study protozoa. That is, first, that they are heterotrophic. Now, heterotrophic means that they derive their food from other organisms, like we people. We people do not create our own food. We people derive our food from, let's say, plants and animals. So, like we, protozoa are also heterotrophic. And secondly, they are mostly aquatic. That means that they are found in water. So now let's see that what exactly protozoa and everything. So protozoa are single-celled microscopic animals. Single-celled, again unicellular, which include what? Flagellates, ciliates, sporozoans and many other forms. Now let's see what are examples of protozoa. So firstly, we will see the example is amoeba. Next, we have paramecium. Next, we have euglena. And finally, we have plasmodium. Fantastic. Let's move forward. Now we are going to study about bacteria. So the important points in bacteria are, number 1, they are unicellular, that is single-celled organism. We know now what is the meaning of unicellular, right? Next is that they are prokaryotics. Okay, so prokaryote is what? It's a single-celled organism that lacks a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. So that is what is prokaryotic. And finally, that bacteria are basically found in colonies. So let's move and study about bacteria in a bit detail. So what are bacteria? Again, bacteria are unicellular. What are unicellular? Quickly, it means having a single cell. And they are what? They are prokaryotic. Now quickly tell me, what is a prokaryotic? A prokaryotic is what? It's a single-celled organism that lacks a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Alright. Now some bacteria are useful to humans while others are harmful. Now how a bacteria can be useful, how it can be harmful, we are going to take up it further lecture. But here, let's see what are the 4 major types of bacteria. They are Bacillus, Vibrio, Cocci, and spirilla. Fantastic. Now let's move forward to fungi. So let's see what is a fungi. First of all, let's see what are some important points of fungi. So there are three important points of fungi. First of all, they are saprophytic. So what is saprophytic? Saprophytic means that they obtain their food by absorbing the dissolved organic material. So the meaning of saprophytic means that they get their food by absorbing the dissolved organic material. Next is that they are parasitic. So what is parasitic? Parasitic is an organism that lives on a host, taking what it needs to stay alive while often injuring the host itself. And finally, there is absence of chlorophyll in fungi. So let's go and study about fungi in a bit detail. So again, what is a fungi? They are saprophytic. That means what? Quickly. That means that they obtain their food by absorbing the dissolved organic material. Secondly, they are parasitic. That means what? That means an organism that lives on a host, taking what it needs to stay alive while often injuring the host. They are multicellular and not microscopic. So what is a multicellular? So what is a multicellular? Now unicellular was an organism that have a single cell, whereas multicellular means organism that has multiple cells. Simple. Now we are going to see what is an example of fungi. So we have yeast as an example. Now we have just studied that mostly fungi are multicellular and they are not microscopic. But yeast is an example that is unicellular and that is a microscopic organism. So yeast is what? Yeast is unicellular and it is a microscopic organism. Now let's move forward and study about algae. So let's see what are algae. The two important points that we need to study in algae is that they are colonial. That means they survive in colonies. And secondly, that they are filamentous. That means that they have filaments. You can see in this diagram as well that they survive in colonies. There are so many of them and they are filamentous in nature. Even in this diagram, you can see that they are filamentous in nature and even in this as well. So now let's move forward and see examples of algae. So number one is volvox and number two is Spirogyra. Great. Now let's move further and study about viruses. Now, viruses are the ones that lie on the borderline of living or non-living. That means that we actually cannot say that whether a virus is living or non-living. So suppose I draw a line and here we have all the non-living creatures and all the living creatures. So viruses is on the verge of it. It can be non-living, it can be living. So let's study about them in a bit detail now. So viruses are what? Viruses are organisms that possess nucleic acid but lack the replicating machinery. That means what? That means a virus cannot survive without a living cell. And that means to survive, viruses need what? Viruses need living cells. That's why, because they are dependent on someone. That's why we cannot say that they are completely living, right? So for living, viruses need what? They need a living cell. Now viruses are also considered to be on the borderline between living and non-living entities for the same as we have just discussed. Now let's see a few examples of viruses. Number one is going to be influenza virus. Number two is going to be HIV. Number three is going to be rabies. We have a few more examples. Let's see what are those. We have poliovirus. We have tobacco mosaic. And we have the very famous COVID-19. So, I hope you people have understood about various organisms. Now, we will take up the remaining portion of the chapter in upcoming videos. Till then, you can log on to EduRev, you can click on Science Class 8, you can go to Microorganisms Friend and Foe. When you click on this tab, something like this will pop on your screen. You can click on test, go to these tests and you can try and attempt these tests. Now you can also unlock all these logged tests, all the logged videos, everything that is logged, that means the logged content in general, by EduRev Infinity Plan and Acer exams at less than 80 rupees per month. Thank you.